were direct students of Thomas B. Warren, who also got PhDs in philosophy. And why is that? Because he taught us that that was the place that, if you're going to teach Christian apologetics, that's the place where you ought to go. You ought to have a background in philosophy, because that way you can study religion and science and the other things that are involved in trying to show the existence of God. Now, you got a Faith Builders Workshop here. And on the Faith Builders Workshop, I thought, well, what better than to lay the foundation of faith by the existence of God, the inspiration of the Bible, and the deity of Christ, the big three. Number one, the existence of God. Number two, inspiration of the Bible. Number three, the deity of Christ. Now, that's in the right order. And that's in the logical order. And why is that? Well, because if God does not exist, he wrote no book and he has no son. Let's say that again. 1, 2, 3. If God does not exist, he wrote no book and he has no son. That was really sorry. All right, try it one more time. All right, say it with me. 1, 2. All right, if God does not exist, he wrote no book and he has no son. If you remember that, you'll put them in the right order if you're studying with somebody. In other words, if they don't believe in the existence of God, you start there. If they believe in the existence of God, but they're not sure about the Bible, then you start there. If they accept those two, then you start with number 3, preach to them Jesus. So the point is, I don't know who determines this. I do know that when I was teaching at Freed Hardman years ago, Ron Book, have you ever heard that name before? Anyway, he used to preach at, let's see, in Washington. We did a campaign there, not too far from the Navy base. I'll think of it in a little bit. Anyway, we did a campaign there. That was my first exposure to coming to Washington, and I'm glad to be here today. All right, so here's your foundations, and here's what we're doing. Today we're doing the existence of God. I had no idea at the funeral of Thomas B. Warren in 2010. His wife, Faye, came over to David Lipe and myself. By the way, pray for David. He's in the hospital, and he needs your prayers. If you know him, please pray for him. Anyway, we were there together. We'd driven to the funeral together, and Brother Warren's wife, Faye, was there. And she came up to us and she said, well, now that Tom is gone, Thomas B. Warren, she said, who's going to debate all these atheists? And, you know, David and I both thought, well, where's the line? I mean, you know, is there a line of atheists somewhere that, you know, somehow or another we're going to debate? So as it turns out, I have debated a few atheists in my time because you want to be prepared to the level of the people who are attacking Christianity. Why? Because if you don't have the educational credentials, probably they're not going to spend much time with you. Why? Well, let's say that you have a PhD in engineering. Are you going to have a debate with a first-year engineering student? And the answer is probably not. Why? You ain't got much to gain. So you got to, you know, kind of play that game a little bit. I didn't care about getting a PhD, but I did because I wanted to be able to do apologetics. Now, what is apologetics? The Greek word apologia means to defend. All right, and so it's used several times in the Bible, but I'm set for the defense of the gospel, Paul says. And you had to, you know, all that you do, you defend the gospel. So whenever you defend the gospel, that's apologetics. Now, I just called this Christian, I called it Christian apologetics because the Muslims have apologists too. And so do the Hindus. And around here, you guys are really, really a melting pot of many religions and many generations, and you can see it just by going to the grocery store. You have a lot of them here. Now, I don't know that you deserve it or not, but you have the reputation of being the most secular part of the United States. Washington and Oregon, even more so than the Northeast, according to some who have studied this, and I don't know why. I'm glad that you're here, and we want more people here, but the secular environment, I don't actually know enough to even talk about that, so I don't even know why I brought it up. So let's talk about the existence of God. Here we go. Okay, Paul built faith in God as creator, so I want you to remember 3 things and 2 things. Can you do it? Here are 3 things. Number 1, the cause arguments. All right, the cause arguments are there's a big word for them, but the cause arguments, cosmological arguments, are based on cause. And then number 2, I want you to remember the design arguments. And the big word for the design arguments is teleological. And then number 3, I want you to remember the moral arguments because these are arguments for the existence of God based on the concept of morality. Now, with those 3 things, I want you to add 2 things. To the 2 things, I want you to add Acts 14 and Acts 17. Because in Acts 14, that's where Paul is with Lystra. At Lystra, he's there, and finally he preaches a sermon and tells them why they should believe in God. Okay, then in Acts 17, he does that at Mars Hill. Now, I haven't been to Lystra, but I've been to Mars Hill maybe 3 or 4 times in Athens. And every time that I have been there, somebody is going to read Paul's sermon from Acts 17 as it overlooks the Acropolis. So you stand there maybe 600 yards away or so on a hill that's very slick. You better be careful how you walk in. So talking about the existence of God. Now, what are the 3 things? Cause, design, morality. What are the 2 passages? Acts 14 and Acts 17. So here we go. Okay, I updated my file because I wanted to put in some Washington stuff. And that was on a day that you could actually see it. When we got here 2 days ago, it was just about that clear. It was just, and I love mountains. Okay, so this is 14,410 feet, according to Paradise. Okay, and I've been to the top of Pikes Peak, which is 14,110 feet, which makes it exactly 300 feet higher than the highest road in the United States. The highest road in the United States is Pikes Peak, but you can't drive up here. Okay, and then if you want to go to Alaska, I've seen Denali 3 or 4 times, and you have to be there on a good day to be able to see it because it's 20,200 feet. And so it's half again as high as Rainier. And then finally, I've never been to Nepal, but Everest is 29,027 feet. And so I like to think about these tall mountains because remember the prophecies of Isaiah chapter 2, 1 through 4, and Micah 4, 1 through 3, that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains. It's going to be established in the top of the mountains. So I like that picture. And I like this one too with all the flowers. Jeff was driving yesterday, and he's, generally speaking, my best friend outside the family, but you cannot get him to stop for flowers because he doesn't care about flowers. But on the other hand, Joyce finally said yesterday, Jeff, stop. Okay, and so we stopped and took some pretty pictures. This is not one of our photographs, but I didn't have time to upload the real ones. And so I just threw in one of the Smoky Mountains. It's not very tall because the highest point east of the Mississippi is about 6,600 feet. But it's pretty, compared to other parts of Tennessee. So I do love it. All right, everyone has his or her own perspective. Somebody was asking Jordan in class last night, what are some of the things that are false teachings that affect people that you have to try to get over if you're going to study with them? And one of them is this, that I have my own truth. I mean, I have my own perspective. This is my truth. You can talk about your truth, and this is my truth, da, 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 da. All right, another one is this. God just wants me to be happy. Now, you know in what context you're going to hear that when you said to somebody you shouldn't be living with that person that you ain't married to. Okay, that kind of stuff. And so, well, God just wants me to be happy, which, by the way, is not specifically in the Bible. You're supposed to make God happy, and it will make you happy in the process, but there's something wrong with it. Okay, and here's another one. If God loves you, he's just going to give you all kinds of money. Well, we got 4 daughters. Why? We don't want 5. Okay, so we got these 4 daughters, and they're all in education. And I kind of thought maybe that when I got really old, that we would have one daughter that was financially successful. And what they all do? Went into education. Well, anyway, what's your own deal here? So here's what I'm thinking. Is it possible to know truth? I'll do this quickly. Brother Warren, that's an abbreviation from his chart. And these 2 words, by the way, if I say that truth is absolute, that means it doesn't matter whether you believe it or I believe it, it's still going to be the same. I can accept it or not accept it, it's still going to be the same. Water's going to boil at 212 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level. Doesn't matter who your mama is. Okay, it's going to do that. That's just the way that it is. All right, so is there anything out there that's like that? Is there anything that's really absolute? And secondly, even if it was absolute, if I could not attain it, it's not going to help me in it because I can't learn it. All right, so is there anything out there that is non-bending, that is absolute, and it is not changed by whether or not I accept it or I don't accept it? So that's the idea here as we look at the truth. The gospel can be transferred to others. So we got the DBR, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Doesn't matter who you are, what culture, the gospel is still going to be the death, burial, and the resurrection of Jesus. And if it's going to be true here, it's going to be true everywhere because it's absolute. And people can learn it. Because Paul said to the Corinthians, I am so glad that you heard this and that you are standing in it. I'm so glad that you are doing what you are doing. All right, the church needs to support the truth. If there's no truth, then what's the church supposed to be doing? Dinners, fellowship meals. I mean, we got to get together and have fellowship meal. All right, but if there is nothing to support, there's nothing to preach here. There's nothing to teach in that room. There's nothing to teach any of these rooms here because there is no truth. And if there is no truth, then what are we getting together for? I guess it's just social stuff, I guess. All right, so number 3. We must not preach what is not the gospel. And if we do, according to Paul, we find ourselves in a position of being anathema. In other words, it ain't good. It means we're going to die and go to hell. All right, so with regard to the false teachers, among whom were the Gnostics, early Gnostics, in Galatians chapter 1, Paul says, I marvel. I mean, I wish that sometimes or another you could hear Paul reading his own letter. So you could just hear how intense this is. I am flabbergasted. I wonder what in the world happened, like you're talking to your new teenager, or your teenager just turned 15 and they know everything. Okay, and now it's not necessary to teach them anything else. Now they're 15 and they're omniscient. How in the world did you do that? All right, so that's kind of the tenor of Galatians chapter 1. All right, now the gospel may not be heeded. Your job is to preach it. You don't have control over whether or not it is heeded or believed. I had a hard time when I started preaching convincing myself of that because I wasn't as effective as I thought that I should be. And when people would hear the gospel and they did not respond and they needed to, it just hurt so deeply that for a while I wanted to take all of that on myself. And that's a real problem because if you do that, you're going to have stomach problems and stress problems and heart problems and every kind of problem you can think of. So your job is to preach and it's their job to heed or not heed. All right, so some not believing the truth can even be deluded. There can be a sense of delusion which actually comes from God, but indirectly so, because they've said no to the gospel so many times that the lie actually begins to sound like a truth. And that's possible with, in our family, we have had addiction with one of our children, and whenever you're addicted, it doesn't matter what somebody tries to say to you. What you really want is your next hit. That's really what you want, and there's not much anybody can say to you. And by the way, if there is no truth, then how did you get free of your sins? All right, so here's the 3 that I told you about. If God exists, that's G, superscript E. And if the Bible is inspired word of God, that's B, superscript I, W, G. And if you claim that you can know anything at all, then this is the way, in religion, then this is the way that it has to be done. All right, let me say this again. All right, do you know anything? I know that my Redeemer lives. Well, how'd you know that? Well, first of all, if God does not exist, you don't have a Redeemer. Okay, so God's got to exist first, and that's where you start. And if the Bible is not accurate, give me one thing that Jesus taught. Give me one saying of Jesus that is not found in Scripture. I mean, you can talk about the secular sources, all of those, Tacitus and Suetonius and Josephus and all those guys. You can do that, but they're not going to tell you anything that Jesus taught. They'll tell you that there was a man by the name of Jesus, but they will not tell you what Jesus taught, which means your understanding of what Jesus taught is based entirely on whether or not the Bible is accurate. And if the Bible turns out not to be accurate, then you cannot possibly know this unless Jesus chose to reveal himself to you personally in some way that I probably wouldn't hold my breath. Or to put it simply, if God does not exist, he wrote no book and he has no son. Where do I start? Wherever the person is. So Philip doesn't join the chariot and say, I want to talk to you about the existence of God. No, he joins the chariot. This guy's ridden the chariot a long way to Jerusalem, probably a proselyte. Otherwise, why would you go to Jerusalem from Ethiopia? All right, and so he's riding along, and then, Philip begins in Isaiah 53, and he preaches at that point. Now, where do you start? Well, where you got to first find out where the person is. One of the things that we've assumed over the years is that if you use Jewel Miller film strips, it starts with the patriarchal age. If you started with open Bible study, starts with patriarchal age. Use Tisdale's charts, starts patriarchal age. Which means we are assuming that that's where you start with everybody. And that is a false assumption. Because why would you start with a Hindu or a Muslim talking about Jesus in that, from Isaiah 53? You wouldn't do that. So you go where the person is, and that's where you start. Now, I have an imaginary Indian friend. This dude happens to be on the front porch in Mitchell, South Dakota. And I liked him. And so, why? Well, no disrespect for the Native Americans. I'm so thankful for them. By the way, remember when our relatives showed up on the ships of Christopher Columbus, Native Americans were saying, hello, how you doing? Okay, so they're already here. All right, so Octum is going to stand for the ontological arguments, the cosmological, the teleological, and the moral. I'm not going to do the first family, but I'm going to do 2, 3, and 4. And here they are. Why? Because these are the ones that come from natural theology, i.e., you look out at the 150 foot, sometimes 3. I think the highest redwood in California is like 380 feet. Okay, and I saw some here yesterday that seems to me like they would challenge that. They're huge, huge, beautiful trees here. All right, and so you use nature to try to talk about God, and that's called natural theology. That means you're talking about God from nature. It just means talking about God from nature. All right, so the cosmological arguments are cause. Teleological arguments are design. And then the moral arguments are, moral. Okay, so does Paul use them? Yeah, he does. All right, so here's something cool about God. A lot of things are cool about God. But in the last debate that I had with a guy with a PhD from Duke University, and his PhD was from Johns Hopkins University. And so we were meeting at Ohio State, and he asked something about, it's easy for first-year philosophy people if you go to a Christian university. Where did good come from? Which came first, good or God? All right, so Plato raised that, and it's called the Stratonicean presumption, and it means which came first. Okay, so he talked about it. Well, if God came first, then there was a time that God existed when there wasn't good. Or if good came first, then good existed before there was God. So how are you going to answer that? Well, with ordinary human beings like us, you can't. Because I was speaking at camp Monday night. At Short Mountain Bible Camp to about 200 campers. And I said, you guys are all dependent on your mother and daddy to be here. That's it. Not to go into biology or anything, but let's just kind of say, you got 46 chromosomes and you got them from someplace and you did not invent them yourself. All right, so you are dependent on your mom and dad, and God made you in his image because God's image is like no other. Therefore, God is the only being whose nature and essence are co-eternally bound. That means you cannot talk about the existence of God without also talking about his essence. You can't talk about the essence of God without talking about his existence. Why? Because they exist together. You cannot separate them except for a period of time to examine them individually. But then you remember that with God, God is the only being of whom this is true. All of you guys are contingent. Everything in here is contingent. Even the wall and the curtains and the screen and everything that you see is getting older. Boy, I certainly am. Okay, so everything you see is aging, even the wood. There's such a thing as, non-destructive metals testing, where they test metals or wood to see if they'll hold the load that they're supposed to hold. Okay, so the wood is aging. And so these are certainly aging, because nobody can make a church chair that lasts over 2 years. Anyway, these are definitely aging. And what else is aging? Well, everything's aging. I'm aging. I can't get down on the floor. If I get down on the floor, I'm going to make a list of everything that I'm going to do when I'm down there. Why? Because I'm only going to do this once a day. All right? Why? If your age, guys, you pop up and down on the floor. It's not a big deal. At my age, it's like an act of Congress. Okay, so, but with God, he is same yesterday, today, and forever. And so that means if I go in the past, I find the I am. And if I go to the present, I find the I am. And anytime I go in the future, I still find the I am. because that is his nature to be. I got to get on with this. I got other stuff to do. All right, so the cause arguments for God. Why cause? Well, because. I mean, that's one of the first words that you learned as a kid. Aggravate your parents. Why? Why? I told you why, because I'm bigger than you and I can make you sit there. Okay, all right, but why? All right, so we learn this early and we start thinking causally. Well, why do I need to do that? So I'm going to give some people some hint in Walmart. It doesn't matter which Walmart you go to in any part of the United States, there's going to be a kid throwing a flying hissy. Okay, and we come from my wife and I come from the part of life where children were supposed to mind, you know. And it seems as though a lot of the young parents, this is a mystery to them. Okay, but anyway, so the cause, why do you do that? Because mama said so, you know, or dad said, I brought you into the world, I can take you out. All right, so the cause arguments for God. Why do you do that? Because here are some of the significant works of Thomas B. Warren. And one of his best debates in 1975 in Texas was with Antony Flew. Antony Flew originally had written a book saying there is no God. And then before he died, he scratched through that and amended and edited the book and said there is a God. And he indicated that the debate with Thomas B. Warren, as well as discussions with other theists, had made a difference as to why he changed his mind. You know one of the things that changed his mind? The complexity of human DNA. And he looked at that and he just said, how can that be? And so, yes, atheists can change. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever, you had formed the world and the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Now, that's not true of any of us because we had a starting point. So I would say to my students, eternal means no starting point, no ending point. But everlasting leaves open the possibility that you had a starting point. Your soul is everlasting, not eternal. If your soul was eternal, then somebody had your soul before you. Now, I know of a church that teaches that. But I don't believe that. I believe that you began to exist with your soul, and the soul will never die, Brother Willie. And the soul will never die. Okay, and so we talk about that. Now let's believe it. Okay, this is just a little bit technical, but this comes from Norman Geisler. He actually came to Freed Hardeman to talk 1 year before he died. He was an author of many, many books and one of the best apologists of our generation. He talked about the surge. It's an acronym. S stands for the second law of thermodynamics, which basically means, all right, the universe is winding down. Then how did the universe, how can the universe be eternal when it is aging and winding down? All right, so that's one line of evidence for the cause argument. Another is the universe is expanding as though it started from a central point of origin. The central point of origin, well, of course, you know, our atheist friends would say that was probably the Big Bang. But when God said it, it was a pretty big bang. Okay, let there be light, and behold, there was light. Now, how long ago it happened, of course, we would differ, but we do believe in the fact that the universe began at a central point. And at that point then, in 6 days, God made the universe, and he said, behold, it is good. The R stands for radiation afterglow. In 1965, there are some guys at Penzias and Wilson who won a Nobel Prize by discovering that there appears to be, you know, there are radio waves that come out from an explosion. They can be measured if there's a big explosion, even of a volcano. All right, so, and since these appear to be in the universe, then the universe did have a start. The universe is not eternal. The galaxy seed is the little variations or ripples in the temperature of the cosmic background microwave radiation seem to indicate, again, that there was a creation. In this case, the seeds that God made the world from, not literal seeds, but the way that he made the heavens and the earth. Hashemayim, the heavens, in Genesis 1 and verse 1 in Hebrew. Va'et haaretz comes from the word eretz for land. Okay, so he made everything that was above and everything that's below. And that's what Genesis 1:1 teaches, of course, you know that. Einstein's theory of general relativity indicates again also that time, space, and matter are interdependent and you can't have one without the other. So how did they all started at the same time in the same place? All right, and the Kalam argument is actually an Arabic argument. but it looks like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause for its existence. In other words, I expect there was of these seats. Imagine somebody made this carpet. Imagine somebody made the curtains. And there's a cause for everything that you look at, so why should... If everything else has a cause, then why should you not have a cause? Therefore, the universe has a cause for its existence, and the cause must be timeless, immaterial, and personal, and therefore God. Another look at that. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, and therefore the universe has a cause. That's what Surge is all about, to try to tell you that there's a start. Now, here's a rough, simplified form. All right, so I asked somebody who doesn't believe in God, you got two possibilities here. The universe had a start, the universe did not have a start. Now, if you go back to the Big Bang, let's say this 14 billion years ago. If you go back to the Big Bang, and there happened to be a seed of matter there that was super dense and super hot, and maybe, according to some speculative philosophers and scientists, this bit of matter was maybe no bigger than a period at the end of a printed page on a sentence. Others would say, like Alan Guth at Harvard, that it was about 6 inches across. All right, so you say, well, that's how the universe got started. Except even your kids, Robert, even Fried-Hardman kids can see through this. You know, they can say, well, wait a minute. The universe did not have a start if it started from that matter that was as big as you say that it was. Okay, well, all right, well, I didn't mean that. What I meant is that the universe is eternal and never did have a start. Okay, so demonstrate that dynamics, that everything is tending toward a state of entropy or disorder, or demonstrate that with any stuff you got going on in your laboratory. So there have been scientists who have been watching vacuum tubes, a spark machine of 1949, and thinking that somehow or another that if you do certain, that hydrogen atoms will just pop into there, you know, like Orville Redenbacher. I mean, somehow or another, how do you think those studies are going? Well, they're looking for another job. Okay, and why? Because you cannot see something that comes from nothing, and it does not work in physics, and it does not work in any of the sciences. So, all right, so you got a choice again. Does the universe have a start or not? If it has a start, I want you to show me how it got started from nothing, ex nihilo. Or if it didn't have a start, then I want you to tell me where that stuff was that the Big Bang exploded from. I want you to do that. Well, as a scientist, I really can't do either one of those. So why don't you just admit it? You're in the middle of something that's above your pay grade. Okay? You cannot answer this. It doesn't matter how many degrees you have after your name. It doesn't matter how many things from National Science Foundation or whatever it is. The point is going to be you have a dilemma here and you cannot get out of it. Now, the only way that you get out of it is to say, oh, well, you know, there must have been... Do this quick, but this is Thomas B. Warren's revised thing about where the first humans came from. The first human being was caused either by natural forces or supernatural forces. Okay, so if it was started by supernatural forces, you don't want to do that because you're going to try to explain it without God, so you wouldn't do that. You're going to try to explain it out of natural forces. So that means that the first human was caused by natural evolutionary forces, in which case the first human being either popped into existence out of nothing, I mean the human DNA and all, you know, ATCG combination of the sugar and phosphate base, all of the sequences of human DNA came about from nothing or about from some previous state. Now, sometimes they will say to you, and I've been to Tanzania a couple or 3 times, and that's close to where, you know, they find the Lucy and the other hominids, as they would call them, or early ancestors of man. And they say, well, see how genetically similar they are? You really don't want to go into that unless you study how genetically similar a rat is to a whale. Okay, if you want to start looking at genetic distance, you will see that that's a dead end for you. So why in the world would you make it say, well, we're 99% genetically similar to chimpanzees, and therefore we must have had a common ancestor? So here's the problem. You either were transformed into a human being while you begin your existence as something else, or two non-human beings gave birth to you as a human. Either way, you're stuck scientifically. All right, so that was the one that Dr. Warren would use. So where did I come from? Well, I'll tell you where you came from. You either came from an infinite set of finite causes, or a necessary being brought you about, and he's not part of the finite. In fact, he invented the finite chain. All right, so let's go further. I did not come from an infinite set of finite causes, therefore, Okay, so how did Paul use these cause arguments? I'm not going to get finished. Okay, in Acts 14, Paul and Barnabas are at Lystra. I'm going to have to get to you can read it for yourself, but I'm going to have to get to the cause arguments in Acts 14, and here they are. All right, Paul argues that God is the source of all life, i.e., he's the cause of all life. God is the only no-cause cause. There's no other being out there that is uncaused. And don't say that God is self-caused, because that's not true. He did not cause himself to come into existence. Matter of fact, he himself is not even subject to causation at all, because he is that perfect being. All right, and contingent beings are not to be worshiped. Why do you do that? Why do you worship the lottery? Why do you worship Rainier? It's beautiful, but it ain't that beautiful. Okay, and you say, well, there's a lot of people that really love nature and hiking and stuff, and I'm fine with that. Just understand that when you're hiking, you are not experiencing directly God. You're experiencing what God made. Okay, and it's not a religion in and of itself. All right, so besides all the miracles, here's one of the coolest things in the New Testament. In Acts 14, they stoned Paul, right? And they know about stoning, and they know they drug him outside the city thinking he was dead. Well, how would you think somebody was dead? Well, he ain't breathing. Okay, so his heart ain't pumping, and we've hit him enough time with these big rocks, and he's smashed all over, and his head's crushed in, and all that stuff. And then Paul just gets up and goes into the city. Stuff. Okay, so you don't want to do that. All right, so to the unknown God. So then Paul uses that as a homiletic device, meaning I'm going to preach to you. And he preached to them about that statue and about the real God is not that statue. By the way, the Parthenon in Nashville, Tennessee is a lot prettier than the one in Athens. I mean, ours is finished. Okay, and they've been working on that one, trying to redo it for at least the 30 years that I've been going there. Okay, and the Parthenon, by the way, when some of the archaeologists from Athens wanted to know how to do the 40-foot-high Athena on the inside of the Parthenon, they came to Nashville to measure ours. Okay, so it's kind of a weird deal. Okay, all right, Acts 17, God is the creator of all things. He gives breath to all beings. God doesn't need us. Hey, if we knew this, then why would we ever argue that, it wasn't okay for a white man to receive a black man's blood, or a black man to receive a white man's blood, or a Filipino, or whatever. Just throw in whatever race of people you want to, because we're all of one blood. And because of that, he is the originator of all human beings. So, that's also in your state somewhere. Where is that? This is the Washington State picture. Where is that? What? Okay, I got the picture off the internet and I thought it was. Okay, so let's say that it's somewhere in Washington. All right, is this somewhere in Washington? The internet said it was. Okay, well, it's pretty anyway. All right, so then design is pretty intelligent. Now let's talk about design. Brother Ralph used to teach purpose, play of the day squared. Purpose, order, direction, and design. So if I'm going to be discussing something with an atheist, I will always try to see if that person has personified nature in any way. Have you personified nature? Which means nature loves me, or nature has things going well for me today, and all that kind of gibberish. Listen, the universe doesn't care about you one way or the other. The universe doesn't care whether or not you exist or you go out of existence. The universe does not care. That requires a person. Now the person, if there's purpose in evolution, I'm going to guarantee you that a man did not do it. because it takes a purposer to put that's maybe not a good word, but it is now. But to put the purpose there, all right? And what about the order in nature? You think there's any order in nature? I don't know. Go to Mount Rainier and look around. You think there's any order in nature? You think there's any direction to the way things that are existing now? Do you think there's any design out there? So I told you design, but actually any of these words would do just as well. And I love it when an atheist personifies nature, because I know exactly what I'm going to say next. And that is, describe to me, prove to me scientifically that the universe has any personality whatsoever. And I'll be waiting for you in the truck. You know, when you get through working on this, you just come and we'll talk some more. But the point is, there is none in the universe. So there's a tiger shark's serrated teeth. Why? Well, because when he bites what he's going to eat, those little serrated teeth makes it difficult for you to pull out. Which means once he's got you. Shark Week is coming up. Okay, and I think there are 3 barriers to macroevolution. It's not just how do you explain how things evolved. That's just biological evolution. But I want to know where the chemicals came from. I used to teach my students whamming. Water vapor, hydrogen, ammonia, methane, and nitrogen. Those are the biochemicals. I want to know where they came from. And if they are going to produce humans, I would like to know if you can explain this, if indeed you think the universe had a start. And of course, the big one is cosmic evolution. Why is it that things that are spherical just began to, spin and just throw off random stuff? And then all of a sudden, we have stuff that we call constellations and galaxies that seem to be pretty well organized. Now, how did that happen? All right, so let's show you some stuff. Brother Warren would talk about the hands. Let's say that the left hand is a natural hand, or the right hand is a natural hand, and the left hand, wait a minute. Okay, and the one on the right side of the chart is a mechanical hand. All right, so if you have a mechanical hand, these people, do you know recently we've had surgeons that were able to do a heart transplant in Houston without making any incisions in the chest? That has been recently done. Matter of fact, last Wednesday night I was preaching at a place where one of the guys was on the team in Houston where they did this. So we're pretty smart, right? Oh yeah, we're pretty smart when we can figure out that stuff. All right, so let's see how good of a mechanical hand we can make. And let's connect the little electrodes to nerves in your body, of which there are, of course, thousands and thousands. And let's make sure that your fingers work right and that you have tactile sensation and that you don't just go around slapping somebody in the head because you have no control over your hand. Okay, and all right, so which one is superior, would you think? Which one's built by design? Of course, you know what the concept is, and that is it's going to be the one that God made. Because if you believe that the lesser one is made by design, why wouldn't you believe that the greater one is made by design? Or, here's an artificial heart, and it can be used as just a diaphragm pump, very simple. Will not adjust to adrenaline, will not adjust to things that your heart will adjust to, but you have this power, around your waist, you have this power pack, and this is one thing you might forget to charge up your phone, but you better not forget this. Okay, because if you have one of these, you better charge up every night. All right, and that's what it looks like inside the heart, and so I'm going to ask you the question. That's what it looks like. Do you think it was built by design? True or false? And then I'm going to show you this one, and I'm going to ask you the same question. And it's superior in virtually every way. All right, so that's design stuff. Here's a little paramecium. It's the simplest, supposedly, but the parts are so complex. And sometimes things like the cleaner fish and the shark, to some people, evolve together. Well, how do they evolve separately whenever one is dependent on the other? The cleaner fish gives him good dental care, and so he doesn't die early. On the other hand, he doesn't eat the cleaner fish while he's doing the dental hygienic stuff on his teeth. I wouldn't try that with your own hand. All right, but he won't do that. So why? Because they have developed a symbiotic relationship. Here's the eye. I understand that Lori is teaching about the eye this week, and I'm sure that's very good. This is really cool. It's one of my favorite. You ready? Okay, here is the thing called the adult frog hopper. This little rascal right here can jump 28 inches, and he's about 2 millimeters. But he can jump nearly as high as your waist. Now, why can he do that? All right, you ready for a real picture of his hind legs? There it is. That's a micro electronic microscope that takes the pictures of the gears long before there was ever a tool and die maker at the local plants. Well, no wonder he can jump 28 inches. What a vertical leap that would be. He could jump over a 200-foot building. And then the bombardier beetle in Australia is pretty cool. It's pretty standard, but it needs to be answered. Why? Well, because he's got these twin chambers, and he's got twin exhaust pipes. So that whenever there's a threat, he can focus them and make them explode at a certain point, like on the tongue of a frog. And if this is not done correctly, then he's going to blow himself to bits. Why is that? Because while they are separate, they can be in the body of this little bug, and it's not a big deal. And there's some of the stuff about it. But on the other hand, how did that evolve separately, and how many bombardier beetles had to sacrifice their lives over the millions of years of evolution for that to have evolved? And I'm just saying it didn't evolve, it's made that way. Joyce and I have both had some issues with orthopedic guys. Matter of fact, they're on speed dial. Okay, and you look at that and you say, wow, how complex is that? And I just took that picture, and one of these, I just wanted to know why we were paying him so much money, and that's why he happens to know the wrist really well. And so you look in at the fingers, and that's still pretty complex, and then you look at a single finger, and that is so incredibly complex, and you say, how in the world did that just come to be? Now, these come from a friend of mine. Joe DeWeese helped me in my last debate with an atheist, and he has a PhD in biochemistry from Vanderbilt University. All right, and this was actually a government-backed deal where they found a few years ago some pictures of your human DNA. Now, that would be like, you're looking at one cell here, but let's zoom in a little bit. Now, what we see is that microRNA, okay, there's DNA, and it's like the Pentagon. RNA is like the foot soldiers, and then microRNA is like text messages, okay? And so whenever microRNA is out there, and it's green, and the red proteins are the proteins in one human cell, look at how complex the cellular sequence has to be. This would put AT&T to shame. And by the way, this was not done by creationists. It was done by a government-run thing for RNA. What time is it? When do I have to quit? Well, nobody's told me to quit yet. Okay, so design arguments from Acts 14 and Acts 17. Acts 17, God made man, designed him for habitation on the earth, and he determined the times and places of his habitation. And we are designed, imago Dei is Latin for in the image of God. We are designed after God, and we're not designed after gold or silver or stone, or not even Mount Rainier cherries. Apparently that's a big deal. Okay, that's somebody telling me that it's time to quit. Did I hear an alarm? Or are you just trying to get me to quit? Okay, so that's Acts 17, and I got to give you it. What time is it? Somebody tell me how much time I got. It's 10 o'clock. I got to quit. I don't know. All right, 5 minutes. All right, moral arguments would be then, there can't be any purpose without morality. Why? Because the only thing that you think is right and wrong came from sources that are not absolute. Like, have you ever been wrong? I actually was wrong a couple of times yesterday, and my wife is reminding me of that. Okay, and Jeff Jenkins, my supposed friend. Okay, and then sometimes we think we get our truth from ethics. I love you, Jeff. And sometimes we think we get our right and wrong from ourselves, sometimes from behavior, sometimes from philosophy, sometimes society, sometimes principles of politics, sometimes core values that we hold in our heart. But let me just tell you, all that stuff right there is negotiable. All that stuff right there will not give you even one thing that you can absolutely base your life on and say, this is absolutely right or this is absolutely wrong. So instead, if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist either. Objective moral values and duties do exist. Therefore, you're going to have a way to measure your morality. If you don't have a way to measure it, then how do you know when you say to somebody, you ought not do that, you should not do that, you must not do that? Well, how do you know that you're right? Well, in and of yourself, you don't. But what if I get this from God? And then God all of a sudden, well, do I find it in the Bible? Yeah, Acts 14, he allowed the nations to walk in their own ways. You know this hurt. It's like having a child, and how early in their existence did you discover that they had freedom of will? I mean, you know, it's kind of like, well, in utero. Okay, and so they come here with a big sense of, I don't want to do that. No. Okay, so imagine God making us in his image and then just having to watch us. But even then, he did good to us, giving us rain and growing seasons, etc. And then finally today in Acts 17, he made us to be seekers. He's not going to tell us right and wrong, but he's going to give us the ability to search. And then our finding it is the basis of the moral arguments. So that happened in Acts 14. In Acts 17, there actually were some good results. And I do have a paperback book, which has nothing to do with what I just said. But it's about pleasing God, and I will talk about that later on. I actually ordered 15 of them to come here. I don't know if they ever arrived or not. I received a message from U.S. Postal Service that probably they were somewhere on Mars. Okay, so that's it. And tomorrow, we do the inspiration of the Bible. Thank you very much. Remember, this is originally a 15-week course, 3 times a week, a 45-hour thing. And so